to
Hello.
Reader's Corner. I'm Elizabeth,
I'm Julie.
and today we are talking about a young adult Sherlock Holmes story. So I
Yes,
hope you're all prepped for a March mystery, because that's how this is going to go down.
absolutely. So, Elizabeth and I read A Study in Charlotte, which is available on Hoopla.
As always.
Yes. And,
We'll be,
oh, go ahead, Elizabeth.
oh, sorry. We'll be discussing the book. We will not be avoiding spoilers, but we'll let you know if we are coming up on a spoiler
Yes,
toward the end of the discussion, and we'll try to keep most of it relatively spoiler-free, so you can decide if you enjoy the book and then jump in and go ahead and give it a read.
absolutely. All right. So, like Elizabeth said, we chose a young adult book, and essentially, kind of the definition for a young adult book is that it's written for young adults. That being said, more than half of young adult books are actually read by adults, which is really cool. So, I read a lot of YA. I know Elizabeth reads a lot of YA. So, and usually the characters are somewhere between the ages of 12 and 20. There can be a little bit of room on the backside of that. I know like we were talking about like Fangirl, Levi is 21 or 22, whereas Kath is like 18, 19. So
And
there's
it's
some
really
wiggle room.
interesting because young adult literature often has a lot of like coming of age themes, finding your own independence. You get a lot of people figuring out who they are, which is a
Hmm.
lot of the reason that I like the young adult books so much. And you
Agreed.
also have, in young adult books, you have a lot of being more willing to take risks, and you have a lot of reality sort of being a looser concept. More things seem
Yes.
to be possible in young adult literature. Why do you normally go for them, Julie?
I really like, yeah, the whole concept of kind of like trying to find yourself, and there's usually a lot of character development and character growth, I feel like, in YA. And so you'll have a person who kind of feels maybe lost and doesn't really kind of know who they are at the beginning, and at the end they feel like they have a better handle on who they are as like a person, being able to kind of strip away some of the things in their lives. And I just think that that's really cool. So just the whole idea,
Absolutely.
finding yourself. So,
Finding yourself. I love
yes.
finding yourself. Some adult books do the finding yourself thing as well. We're not eliminating that possibility, but like
Oh no.
YA, it's practically the brand.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
it's also interesting with YA because you get a wide range. So you have some young adult books that are suited for younger readers, that
Yes,
are
and there's
designed for the lower
definitely
end.
a difference where there are kind of based on the age of the characters and the activities they're doing. There are some, yeah, there's it's a range.
It's a huge range. This one falls on the higher end, A
I would
Study in
agree.
Charlotte
Yes,
by Brittany Cavallaro. Cavallaro.
I think that's how Cavallero, I think.
I was going to say, I think it's Italian instead of Spanish, and I've never been entirely clear on whether you say the double L's. But it's an interesting book. So it's a Sherlock Holmes retelling, yes.
Yes.
And it is narrated by Jamie Watson. He's always been intrigued by Sherlock Holmes. Their great grandfathers are infamous. So the Holmes line always says the mystery solving. Sherlock is famous for solving crimes, infamous for having Sherlock's same temper and drug habits. And so Jamie and Charlotte are both at Connecticut boarding school when there is a murder.
A murder.
A murder? Who would have guessed? And
A
it's so
murder.
suspicious,
I
and it's
know.
someone neither of them liked, and so they weren't friends before, but now they have to come together to figure this out. And also, the murder is very blatantly based on the Sherlock Holmes story, so they got to do that. It's
Yes.
very meta, which is
Yes.
fun.
Yes, and I like that they definitely address the fact that it's not like it's a happenstance, like, oh, it just happens to be, based on a, it's definitely, it is addressed. It's part
It
of the
is
plot. So,
like it's not just what a random happenstance. It's part of the book.
yes. So, and so Brittany is a New York Times bestselling author. She's written Hello Girls, which is on my to read list, and Muse, which I have downloaded right now, but I haven't started yet. And she has done, because Muse is like a historical fiction fantasy book. She also writes poetry, and she has a master's in creative writing and her PhD in English literature. So
And
she knows
Hello
her
Girls
stuff.
is another book based on two characters growing really close over crime, although in this case they're committing the crime. But it also has that darker, high-end young adult feel. So her market is definitely the older end of the YA spectrum, which would have been good for some of the social media reviews to know. So Hoopla gives it 4.5 stars, Goodreads gives it 3.78. Amazon gives it 3.8, and the top rated review is a concerned adult saying, "This is too old for my child." So if you're looking at this and you're like, "What about a present for my dear, darling beloved?" Please consider, are they comfortable with sex, with drugs, with all the rest? Because if you're sort of mentally comparing this to a TV show, like think Riverdale, think the WB, we're going for like high stakes, high drama, high everything. Like,
yes.
High
is the theme. Yes.
High is the theme, and like it's not that that these subjects aren't treated with nuance, because they are.
Yes.
But it's also they're treated with nuance, like drugs are bad, don't do them. But also it's a Sherlock Holmes book, and it doesn't shy away from the fact that canonically Sherlock Holmes was not, the best there.
It's not the world's greatest role model.
No, please don't be like Sherlock Holmes. Solve your mysteries with sobriety, preferably. Like, don't destroy your own health and sanity to solve your mysteries. Now, what is our personal history with Sherlock Holmes? Because I had a fun time back when Sherlock Holmes was first sort of booming. I got to have a really fun discussion with someone over whether she, a lifelong Sherlock Holmes fan, preferred Robert Downey Jr. or the BBC, which were at those times the two big adaptations. But now there are so many.
Yes,
so let's talk about that.
I've seen both the Robert Downey Jr. and the Benedict Cumberbatch. I prefer the Benedict Cumberbatch personally, but and then of course there's the Data episodes and Next Gen of the Sherlock Holmes, which are also
yes, Data. That's Sherlock Holmes. I hug him forever. Love that Star Trek. I gotta toss in a shout out to my old friend, the Great Mouse Detective, which was the first time I encountered Holmes, and the first time I loved Holmes, even though it is Basil of Baker Street, and definitely no relation to any humans living or dead with this mouse detective. I've also read a couple of Sherlock Holmes books. Have you read any Sherlock Holmes books before?
I have not. I don't tend to read a lot of mystery because I'm really bad at reading. Like, I never see it coming.
You and I are bad in different ways because I always see it coming.
I never see it coming. I'm always just like, what? With the 49 clues you gave me, I did not see that coming. What?
No, impossible.
Yeah,
if I don't
see it coming,
I have to sit on my hands so I don't skip to the end, which is not an ideal quality. But I've picked up some of the weirder adaptations as well. So I picked up Angel of the Crows, which is supernatural Sherlock Holmes.
Ooh, I would read that.
Which is very fun. That one is interesting. I've picked up A Study in Honor, which is a sort of futuristic cyborg Sherlock Holmes, which was fun as well. I've picked up Aliette de Bodard's like spaceship and space captain Sherlock Holmes, like it's a sentient spaceship. That was fun. Sentient spaceship is Watson. And I've picked up, there was The Case of the Mysterious Letter, I believe it's called. And that one like is a Lovecraft retelling, but without, the horrible racism. Because
which is always good to not have.
Which is always a plus. It's not actually written by Lovecraft. It's written by someone else who just takes that universe and is like, what if I put a bunch of diverse people who Lovecraft would have hated in here and made them all Sherlock Holmes? So those are all a wide variety. And like one of the main tenets I have, not with the movies obviously, but with the books I've been picking up, is that every, whoopsie-daisy, Sherlock Holmes adaptation I've read has been a queer adaptation, which is why when I saw the book summary, I was like, Jamie. And then I opened the book and I was like, Jamie, it's a boy. Not that this is a bad thing at all, just I did not expect any Sherlock Holmes adaptation to be heterosexual, but I adjusted, so it's fine. I know that the Moffat BBC interpreted him as asexual, as did I think the 40s Rathbone adaptation was leaning that direction. And then you have, the Robert Downey Jr., of course, had the Irene Adler ship. So it's interesting. Sherlock Holmes is a very mysterious character, and people interpret him as like different varieties of on the scale of jerk to just sort of weird and oblivious.
Yes.
And they interpret John Watson on different scales,
Yes.
from like oblivious to the competent one in this partnership. So where do we think this one fell on the Sherlock and Watson competency scale? How do we feel about how they characterize our beloved characters here?
Jamie has like moments. Like he has moments where you're just like, oh, Jamie definitely has his like life together more, like, not a drug addict, and
The bar is so low,
yeah,
but
the
we
bar
reached
is
it.
but like he kind of has like the violent streak that you more see with Holmes a lot more, I feel like. And so because Jamie's a little violent.
I like that they included that, actually. So that's something that they kind of played with BBC Sherlock. The idea that both of these men were sort of adrenaline junkies, and that for all that Sherlock is the intense problem-solving one, Watson has just been waiting to punch someone in the face since he left the war, and is just sitting there like, ah, yes. So I really actually appreciated that they had Jamie is a genuinely nice character.
Yes.
For most of the story, he is genuinely very nice. He's got this worship thing with Holmes, which is fascinating, and I want to talk about.
I would say an unhealthy relationship with her, for sure. Like an unhealthy, like...
Definitely complicated. I feel like at first I was like, unhealthy relationship, and now I'm sitting here and I'm like, no, they're the high school drama couple, actually. Like,
That's a better way to describe it, yeah. Yeah.
Because what they are is Jamie's been reading about Holmes in the paper for years, and there's that expectation that they're going to be friends because it's drawing on this like years of history.
It's Watson and Holmes. It's meant to be.
It's Watson and Holmes. Yeah, exactly. What was the Kismet? I love that word. I never used that word, and I love it so much. Like, thank you for using the word Kismet.
Of course.
I forget how much I love that word.
We should use it more often.
Let's use it. So this is Kismet Sherlock Holmes.
This is Kismet
I love
Sherlock Holmes, yes.
And I like that there's that complicated relationship where they first meet. And Holmes is like, wait, no. I appreciate that you're Watson. I am also interested in your existence as a person. This is not an automatic... This is not automatic friends, pass, go collect $200. Like, sorry, we're very different people. And we've never interacted before.
She was very much too just like, I don't need people. You're people. I don't need people. And I don't need to do this whole Sherlock Watson. Like, she saw the kind of the kitschiness of it, that I don't want to be the stereotype. I don't want to be, oh, it's Sherlock and Watson. And no, I'm not here for that.
No, thank you. Here's a take on Sherlock Holmes' characterization. I watched 10 Things I Hate About You over the weekend.
I love that movie.
It's such a good movie. I think they should cast like a Kate equivalent for Sherlock Holmes in this one, for Charlotte Holmes specifically. Because like I've been sitting there, I've been thinking about it. Charlotte Holmes has reasons for being like, no friendship, no thank you.
Yes.
For being sort of suspicious of Jamie's motives and going, okay, but you have a crush on me from reading about me in the paper. You just got in a fist fight for my honor or something, and I'm not about that. Like,
and that's all happens very early in the books. That's not real spoilers.
We're not in spoiler territory. This is all before the murder has even happened.
Yes.
But there's the interaction where she doesn't trust Jamie.
Yes.
She's not sure he sees her as a human being.
And then,
because
big spoiler time. Like spoiler.
Oh yeah, spoiler.
She has a very dark past. She has been burned before.
Yeah, and we should probably talk about that.
Yeah. Like
trigger warning for sexual assault in this book, which I was not expecting.
No.
That tends to not be a Sherlock thing.
No.
Like, I can't say it's never a Sherlock thing because I'm mentally clicking through my roster. I can't think of it, but that doesn't mean it never happened.
Yeah.
I think Elementary maybe toys with the idea of an abusive relationship for Sherlock Holmes with Moriarty. Whether there was assault involved, I'm not sure. But in this case, Charlotte was drugged by the murder victim in this story before the story ever, which is one of the reasons that
Why
she
she's
is
a
so much in the
suspect.
spotlight.
Yeah.
So that's worth being warned about. If that's something you know is a sensitive topic for you, just be aware.
Yeah,
Um,
it definitely it took me by surprise. And it's one of those that like, as like the parent, my knee-jerk reaction is always like, "Oh, why is this in YA?" Because you want to protect kids because you're just like, "Oh," but like I think it's
it
important
also
to address
needs to be
it
addressed.
because it
Yeah,
happens. It absolutely happens and it's awful and tragic, but I think being able to kind of read about it and see that, like they're not alone if they've been a victim or they have a friend that's been a victim, I think is really important.
it is. It definitely is. And in this case, I feel like they included the assault not to make Charlotte appear weaker as a character,
No.
which would have made me very quietly flip a table and walk away.
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah, we would have just been like, I'm not here for this.
but to make her sympathetic, despite the fact that she's a human equivalent of a hedgehog, which is interesting to me that we have to make that excuse for the female Holmes.
Yeah.
That, yeah, she's allowed to be a jerk because terrible things have happened in her dark and mysterious past.
Yeah.
I think I appreciated a little more the idea of the Holmes pressure to excel, to succeed, to be who people expect,
Yes.
because that one made sense to me without the bonus side of trauma that was going on. I
Yeah.
also like that she did have the Mycroft Milo Holmes as the older brother who still had that relationship, because that complicates matters a little bit too. Sherlock definitely has, like, even in the older work, this sort of younger sibling, older sibling thing going on that influences a lot of his behavior.
Oh yeah. And like
And I like how that got portrayed.
more spoiler, the whole like Holmes as a dynasty and everything, that gets unraveled a lot more in the subsequent books because this is the first book in a
The
series.
subsequent books.
The subsequent
Is
books.
this a series?
It is a series. I believe
How
there
many are
are
in the series?
4, I believe.
I did know about the series. I did look it up, but I wanted to be dramatic. And I know, from what I know, it follows Jamie and Charlotte over the years. Is that correct?
Yes.
Like, and that strengthening relationship. Like, this is very much this is almost sort of an origin story book. So if you go into this is the origin story laying the ground for future adventures. I thought the mystery was really fun in this. There's a lot of references to the canonical Holmes. You almost thought there were too many references, right? Like checklists.
Sometimes it was, yeah, sometimes it felt like a little checklisty, like, it got to be just a little bit, but she tied them all in really well. There weren't like necessarily throwaway references, but like you and I were talking about the lab and how you and I had like slightly different takes on the lab that Charlotte has.
Yeah, the lab. So I thought the lab was cool because I had at that point just taken my disbelief and chucked it out the window.
And I think if I had done that, it would have been better. I just kept thinking, how would they not find that? How would that just like legit not be discovered?
Charlotte has a secret lab
on campus of this private school.
It's in like a basement that's not often frequented. She gets in through a window. I thought it was rad. I'm like, awesome. For some reason, Jamie and Charlotte are just obsessed with sneaking through windows in this book.
Oh yeah.
By the time you reach the halfway mark, they've been through like 3 or 4 windows.
If there is a window, they will try to get into it. It's
which, the tiny part of me that wanted to be like the spy who rolled through the window and like came like this and was like, I'm in. That part of me was really down with just all of the going through windows. I'm like, who needs doors? I don't need doors. You don't need doors.
No.
This is fine. If I was a kid on a fancy boarding school campus, I would absolutely never use a door.
And it does make sense that like the windows at the fancy boarding school are probably not nearly as secure as the doors because old windows are not the best in the entire world. So at least that there was some plausibility for me with the windows.
There was that plausibility. Let's talk about complicated feelings. August Moriarty. This isn't necessarily a dislike. It's just complicated.
Oh, it's so complicated.
August is 6 years older than Charlotte Holmes. And there's this very interesting spoiler subplot where Jamie is led to believe for the first half of the book that there's this old romance between August and Charlotte. And several characters mention, "I'm so glad it's you who's with Charlotte now."
Even though they're not necessarily together.
They are not together for the
No.
majority of the book. This is an assumption that a lot of people make, and it's interesting that so many people see boy Watson, girl Holmes, and are like, dating.
Yes.
Which there is like the prom scene, which was fun. Like I was sitting there, very 10 things I hate about you. She shows up, she's like, "We're not going to the prom. I have a dress." And I'm like, all right, I do like how bossy Charlotte is in this book.
Yes.
Like, she's not likable, but that's fine. But yeah, August is interesting because a little over halfway through, Jamie finds out that the relationship was entirely different and that August Moriarty purchased drugs for Charlotte. So it's not actually, and so he's looking it up and he's like, okay, did she blackmail her math tutor? But then there's like also this ambiguous tension where he's like, oh, he was terribly attractive kind of thing. And I'm sitting over here just like making the equivalent of like a screech, like that high-pitched noise a TV makes when the screen goes rainbow with the rabbit ears. And I'm going, 14 and 20 was when they met. I don't care. There is no universe in which this would be a thing. And then I'm like, well, this is, then I had to like, okay, this is a CW world. This is not a real thing. This is a 15-year-old boy who's looking at the circumstance going, oh no, he's hotter than me. But also like 20, 14. It
was definitely cringy. Very, very cringy.
It was cringy. I don't think the narrative excused it necessarily. I think Jamie was definitely in boat. Charlotte was more in charge of this situation than the paper leads you to believe, and the Daily Mail is not reputable. Let's talk about the British English thing, because Daily Mail got brought up, and like I had such complicated feelings about the characterization in British and English, and I'll tell you when they kicked in. It's when Jamie used the word pants to describe trousers, and I just like made a tea kettle shriek inside and went, there is no way a child raised in London would use that word. But then he's not, of course. He's raised in America, then went to England later, and the American slang he uses is directly addressed. But there's just this very weird, like, oh, hooray, Britain, do, 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 which is the wrong song. God save the Queen, something, going on in the background. And I was like, I don't know how I feel about this. Like, we're not doing American Holmes. We're not doing British Holmes.
It's some weird, terrible hybrid.
We're doing American Watson and British Holmes. Well, and that's fascinating. But American Watson plays rugby, so he's like half American, half British. So what is happening? And why?
I didn't buy just the entire idea of Watson of Watson and Holmes being sent to an American boarding school. And like the other thing that like always perplexed me was like spoiler. Jamie's parents don't want him hanging out with Charlotte. They're like, oh no, those Holmeses are trouble. Like, I
actually was good with that to a certain extent.
Well, that part made sense to me, but then why would you send your child to the same school? Like, that's the part I was just like, and the why? The why? I
thought it was interesting because the dad had no problem with Charlotte, was like, she's cute. Yeah, and the mom was like, she's trouble. And that was interesting to me because I thought that was like Jamie's complicated relationship with his father was a point in the book that they were trying to investigate. And that whole idea where the American-British difference and the different perceptions of Charlotte are a huge part of the plot. So I was like, okay, I can see it. Like, you want to get the problem druggie out of London, and you want your son to bond with his father and not to connect with Charlotte, but it's complicated, so you send them to Connecticut. But at the same time, there's definitely a genre of YA that's the rich boarding school kids.
Oh, yeah.
And that is a healthy genre, that is a flourishing genre. Maggie Stiefvater's Raven Boys falls in that genre. I think it was We Were Liars and that sort of thing falls in that genre, which was insanely popular a few years back.
Even like Vampire Academy,
like it's a very flourishing genre. Mm-hmm. And I just personally always have problems with it. but that is a me thing, not a book thing, where I have to come into the book and be like, I don't understand it.
Well, and Jamie is, again, spoiler, Jamie is not exactly like, Jamie is there on rugby scholarship, right?
He is, and that's another way that they sort of try to investigate class difference between the
Yeah.
two of them, which is interesting, but at the same time, he's like, I'm not rich because I'm not going to Bermuda. And I'm like, I do not live in a world where going to Bermuda is the metric for whether you are rich. If you are, what? So that, and then Holmes, of course, does live in that world. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. But also, like, what is happening here?
Yes.
And that's a very canonical difference, too. Like, Holmes is always richer than Watson in almost every adaptation I encounter. Except for maybe the supernatural one where Holmes isn't human. So it's like, it's not really money. You are not a human being. It's fine. Nobody minds. But yes, I feel like I would have been just as much on board if they had sort of investigated that conflict a little more of why are they in an American boarding school? What does this change? And most importantly, why isn't Charlotte more uncomfortable? If she's grown up in England all her life, why don't we get any references to Charlotte making an incorrect calculation because she's working off the wrong data or like fumbling with some aspect of American culture? Instead, it feels like very much like it is the American Anglophile who's super fond of Britain, sort of being like, smush, best of both worlds. And I'm like, it is not the best of both. It is not a smush. Fix it. But I haven't read the rest of the books in the series, at which point they might.
I don't believe so.
Okay. So
but
this
I could
is
be
just something you'll have to take on, like, that's fine. And if you're the kind over here who, like, obsesses over something as silly as pants versus trousers, maybe it will bug you. If you're not that person, then you'll probably be fine.
Well, because pants is a very different word in England.
Pants is underwear.
It's underwear.
I'm like, if I had lived in England for any length of time,
Yeah.
I would be over there like, I am never uttering this slang phrase again in my life. Like with rubber in reverse. Rubber is eraser in England. It does not mean that here.
Boot and trunk and lorry and truck. Like we could go on and on and on. And I don't really remember Charlotte using any British
never
slang.
uses British slang, and I was fine with that because
Because
like,
she's Charlotte
Holmes,
and she would
be able to adjust.
Yeah, she would
Also,
censor.
But also, there's a huge thing where they're trying to humanize Charlotte and give her flaws. That would have been a very easy flaw to include.
At least like when she was with Jamie, if she kind of like relaxed a bit with Jamie, that she could, you know, be a little bit more what you would consider like herself, as opposed to like the American act that she's probably putting on.
And one more thing before we wrap up here. Jamie, that's the one that you and I disagreed on because you liked Jamie quite a bit.
Jamie.
You thought Jamie was sweet as pie. And I'm over here and I'm like, Jamie's a nice guy, TM. Little bit. Like, I like him. He's got some therapy that he needs. I'm giving the boy therapy. It was a both of them. Like, and I did like Jamie quite a bit, but I was still over here on the sides going, y'all are the drama couple and you both need to like work through your issues. Just a little bit, my darlings. Just a little bit. Please. I know there's a murder. There's other priorities, but please.
Yes.
Please. Trust is a good foundation for a friendship, a relationship, or whatever you got going on, and you don't got it yet.
Oh, yeah.
So please.
Yes.
As we wrap up.
I was going to say, the only other thing I'll say is that I went on to Common Sense Media just because they give, like, I think, like, really kind of base ratings for parents and stuff like that. And I think they said, I think it was 15 and up was their rating for ages.
Right. And I would recommend, I think that's fair. When I was reading it, I was mentally going 16 and up.
That's kind of what I was thinking, but yeah.
Just make sure whatever kid you're with, your metric's Riverdale. If they're good with watching Riverdale, they'll be good with this book. If they're good with watching sort of the more complicated shows along that line, they'll be good with this book.
Yes.
But like we said, mention of drugs, mention of sexual assault, like there's
Mhm.
serious issues that get tackled
Oh,
here.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Which,
And
side note, it's kind of funny. We're like, the murder. We're not warning about the murder. We're warning about the other stuff. Murder's fine. That happens
yeah.
all the time, even in middle grade. But it does. And like, we've all collectively reached the point where we're just like, murder, not a big deal. These other things, a big deal.
These
So that,
things over here we want to talk about.
yeah, definitely a weird little divide where like Americans are way too desensitized to violence. But there you go.
Yes.
Something to be aware of.
Yeah, and he definitely, yeah, I mean, and there is definitely like there is violence, like not to, but yeah, it got like all three.
On that note, like, would you read the next book?
Well, I did. I read all four of them, so I liked
You
them.
read all four, so you
I
were a
read all
fan.
four. I liked them.
I feel like I'd read the second one just to see what direction this goes because I'm intrigued. It's not my typical Sherlock Holmes retelling, as we discussed. I typically go for the weirder ones, the ones where there's some element of like the supernatural or extra technology, like with the cyborgs. Not normally the boarding school, but I am interested to see what direction it goes in. I like my mysteries. I like seeing what's happening here. I'm curious if these kids ever figure out their lives and their choices. And I think that's really going to be the appeal if you're drawn in, is you're going to be like, I want to see what happens with these kiddos.
Yeah, and they kind of do some fun things in the sequels. There are ones that I liked more than others, but it's like a fun little series. So
It's a fun series.
yes. All right, and then next month.
Next month, you'll see my face again.
Yes.
Because we're doing Horror Mermaids with Into the Drowning Deep by Mira
Ooh.
Grant, which, Horror Mermaids, always a fun time.